Or if you don't have any of those options, you're gonna want to use manual steam. Because the air can't circulate around the edges of the dough, your top will get that nice color and caramelization, but the sides will be really white and will look underbaked. I want to talk to you about baking, why we do certain things when we're baking our sourdough. So first of all, your home oven, unless it's a really new model that injects steam, our home ovens are made to take humidity, take moisture out. And so they are a very dry environment. And so why that is a problem is that bread has two stages of baking. The first stage is a high steam, high heat environment, which is needed for this outside part of the dough to remain soft so that the dough can continue expanding and create what we call oven spring. So if it becomes too dry in there, what you'll see is rather than expanding to become this beautiful loaf of bread, it will stop, it will get dried out, and it will bake a really dense loaf with a thick crust. And so some of you might have experienced that if you've done one loaf in the past. I know that my first loaf, I didn't know about how to help my oven become more steamy, and so I had the same problem. So first stage, we want steam in the oven, and so we have to create a steaming environment. The best way to do that for the country bread is by using a thick cast iron pot. So you see this guy. This is probably the smallest one I would use. This is a Le Creuset. I also have a large one that's much bigger, but this would be the smallest one I would use. This one is about 10 inches across. So this would be about the smallest size that I would use. It works well because it has this heavy lid, and that heavy lid helps it to lock in that steam because all that moisture in our dough is going to start evaporating rapidly during the baking process. By putting that lid on, it traps it inside. This is a Lodge, and it's called a combo cooker because you could cook with it like this as well as like this. So a lot of bread bakers will bake with it like this. It mimics a cloche. A cloche is a special baking instrument that is the same idea, where it's a shallow bottom and a high volume top to bake bread in. And so this again creates that steam you want. And the cool thing about this one is that with the second stage, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, you want it to get crispy and crunchy and get that caramelized crust. And so you could just leave it in the bottom one and just remove the top and do the second stage of baking in that bottom part of your pan. Those are two ways that you could create your own steam for the country loaf. Now, what if you do not have those pans? What if you have a pot that has maybe a somewhat flimsy metal lid? You can use that. I find that sometimes those metal lids are not heavy enough to create the seal needed for maximum steam. You want to augment the steam manually, and I'll show you how. Or if you don't have any of those options, you don't have a pot big enough or you don't have the right pot, you're going to want to use manual steam. When I use manual steam for different breads, whether it's a baguettes, sandwich loaf, these rolls, I first start with a pan that's non-breakable. So you see, this is my old brownie pan, just metal, 8x8 pan, and I fill this with water, about an inch or so, and I preheat this in the oven. If you somehow have a really hot oven and too much steam evaporates, just add a little water in before you add your bread so it can create that steam. So I have this in the bottom of my oven. I've also used that method where you roll up towels and completely saturate them with water, so it kind of creates more of a slow release steam. I don't really like using that a lot because I sometimes will forget about my oven. I've done it in the past. I don't want to burn towels, so that's why I don't often use that. Another way that people can steam their oven in a pan like this is they use lava rocks, because the lava rocks will hold in that moisture and will do a more slow release. So that's a great option too. I also add a squirt of just water to the walls of my oven right before I shut the door. This creates a little bit more of that burst of steam that we want for that steamy environment. As I hold the door just slightly ajar, I spray the walls generously. I try not to get the actual bread wet, because sometimes I find that if I spray the bread directly, sometimes it will bake a weird blotch or have a weird mark on it. So I just try to get all the way around the oven and then quickly shut the door to trap that steam. So this is another great tool. So those two tools are excellent for creating the manual steam in the oven. Now the second stage of baking is when you are developing that caramelized crust. And what you want to do is make sure that you take out those steam-inducing environments or steam inducing tools. If I have a pan of water, I want to remove that. If I have a lid on my pot, I want to remove that. For this style of baking pot, I would completely remove the bread. So that's why when I use a pan like this or use a pot like this, I have my bread baking on an extra long sheet of parchment so that I can carefully lift that out and bake it directly on the rack. Because if I simply remove the top of this and bake my dough in here, because the air can't circulate around the edges of the dough, you will find that your top will get that nice color and caramelization, but the sides will be really white and will look underbaked because they're not getting that hot airflow around it. Those are my tips for how and why we bake the way we do. So it's really important to get that steam in there to make sure that our dough reaches its maximum amount of volume in the oven, and then make sure you get that second half of the bake right so that we get that caramelized, beautiful, golden crust. I hope that video was helpful for you. Please like it if it was, and share it with a friend. And if you like this content and want to see more, you can subscribe. And down in the description box, you can see some of the resources I'm using, my resource guides, as well as how to find my online courses if you really want to get started and see the whole process of making sourdough. Leave me a comment. Let me know, what are you getting stuck on? What would you like to see more of? That really helps me decide what to create for you in the future. Thank you for being here.